Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us for Rewriting the Rules. We're on episode 2, Rethinking the Future of Assessment. My name is Gavin Omar. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News, and I'm joined by...
I'm Rebecca Conway, the Director of Research Innovation at NCFE. And this, we were trying to work out how many of these shows we've done together. We've done so many at this point, haven't we? So it's great to be back with you.
We have done a few. I think it must be, I think we've got to at least have done a dozen by now, Rebecca. So but yeah, looking forward to this one. It's a topic which is really, really, really hot at the moment, but also really important to be sort of looking at when we're rewriting the rules. I think it's such a cool name for a season. So rewriting the rules is looking at the future of qualifications, and it's in partnership with FE News, and basically it's a series exploring how England's qualification and skills system can support opportunities, progression and employment. So we're on the second episode, Rethinking the Future of Assessment, and we've got some really cool guests which we're going to bring in a bit. And Rebecca, we was on the warm-up, we were talking about so many different things around the future of assessment and what does that mean, and rethinking how that could be. But basically what we're trying to do today is explore how assessment needs to evolve to reflect real skills and competence, not just exam performance. And we're going to explore assessment innovation, including the role of AI. And this season and this session is going to examine how assessment shapes teaching and learning and employability outcomes, because it does across the system. And so joined by Rebecca, who's Director of Research and Innovation at NCFE. Dr. Rebecca, so we've got like some real depth of knowledge in there, Rebecca, so I know you downplay that an awful lot. And we've got Anthony Painter from UFI Voxet Trust, and Julie Kaye from DN Colleges Group. But kicking things off, Rebecca, what has assessment become such a critical focus in conversation around qualification reform and skills?
Oh, we start with a meaty one there, Gavin. Hey, to kick things off. I mean, I think the thing is with assessment, it's an emotive topic, right? Everyone remembers their exam nerves. They have all those sort of nightmares of waking up in the middle of the exam hall, driving test day, that kind of thing. So it's obviously something that's fraught with a lot of emotion, and it's the final step that a learner has to complete before they can achieve a qualification and then move on with their life. You know, pick up their first job on their career journey, move into the next stage of education. So it's really, really important. And that's one of the key reasons why obviously it has a strong focus in these reform discussions. And what I really like actually about the way that you've and colleagues at NCFE have titled this series of live streams is the fact that we talk a lot about reform, don't we, and disruption and change and trying to get ready and feeling like we need to catch up. But actually, it's an opportunity to rewrite the rules as well. So if we can remake the landscape, we need to look at how we can make assessment more accessible and inclusive for all those learners in the system.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly. How many opportunities do you get to rewrite the rules when you've got all that different pre-knowledge in there? It's rare, and there's this opportunity right now. Another point, a meaty one for you again, and then we'll bring Anthony and Julie in. But how does the way we assess influence what providers teach and our learners experience qualifications? Because I think that's kind of important as well. You alluded to it in your points there, but I think it's an important point to sort of explore, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think knowing what comes at the end of a program of education training, it naturally shapes how you prepare your learners to get there, doesn't it? You really want them all to succeed and perform at the best. So it does naturally shape learning. For example, you might focus on a particular topic because you know that that's going to come up in the exam, or you might practice a particular skill because you know that it always comes up in the observation or the EPA, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. So it's a phenomenon that we call washback or backwash, and it's the impact that assessment has on teaching and learning. And what we need to do is try and minimize the negative around that. So the teaching to the test, for example, those examples I've just shared with you, and try and increase some of the positives as well. So how can we make assessment a force for good that can really drive positive teaching and learning? But also, how can we minimize the sort of detrimental impact that assessment has in the classroom? So, maximizing the time that teachers have, for example, to teach and not just taking people out to, really lengthy exams that, take that time away from them being able to practice the skills in the classroom. We need to try and disincentivize assessment as a thing that's added on at the end and make it more integrated as part of learning and teaching as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with how we're rewriting the rules, there's all these opportunities to be able to explore that, isn't there? And with technology fast evolving at the moment, so it's exciting times, isn't it? You know, it's that well-known saying, it's a curse, but I think it's a blessing that we've got to be able to, you know, experience this at the moment and be able to actually try to shape this. So I think it's kind of cool. Should we bring Anthony and Julie in?
Do it. Yeah, we've got a tech expert and a pedagogical expert working with us today on the show, haven't we? So we're going to get some fantastic perspectives.
Yeah, and be able to get that from both sides is absolutely key. So Julie, can I bring you in? Hey Julie, how are you?
Yeah, and thank you for that, Rebecca. I'm not sure a pedagogical expert, but I'll try my very best anyway. Just put some context behind it.
And I'll bring Anthony in as well. Sorry.
So welcome everybody. Obviously I look after education programs for young people primarily at the college. So assessment's really important to us for those young people to get them to where they need to be. You know, what works really well is when we have employers-based projects, you know, when we're working really well when we get those employer-based projects and our students are really assessed on those competencies. And in real life working environments, actually, that's when we really get the best out of them. You know, it's developing that culture, and we use a lot with our world skills. So we're Centre of Excellence for the World Skills. We've really embedded that with our teaching and learning, our assessment, and really ensure that we get those pressure tests in what the world skills talk about an awful lot, you know, because it is that competence to mastery. So that works really well from us as an assessment point of view. What doesn't work so well is when we don't have the flexibility to actually assess them in the way that those students actually need to be assessed in. And sometimes that is when the awarding organisations don't always keep up with where we need to be. So sometimes we find that a bit of an issue, Rebecca, and I can see you nodding there. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
No, I think that's brilliant, Julian. It's really interesting that you mentioned the world skills methodology. You know, if we're talking about what works well in terms of assessment approaches, and that's a very analog approach in many ways, getting kids into a room. And it'd be really interesting to hear Anthony's perspective actually from UFI VocTech Trust and that more technological angle, and see how those sort of sit next to each other.
Yeah, definitely. And Anthony, we haven't done a proper hello. How are you, Anthony? And thank you for joining us.
I'm good. Good to see you, Gavin. And Gavin, can I just say, I love the intro music. It had a whole AC/DC vibe.
It did have a proper AC/DC going on, didn't it?
Mid-morning on Wednesday.
I said to Dan about that actually, because Dan put that together. So yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, this is. I mean, clearly the debate is starting to shift around assessment and what it is, and the point Rebecca made about it becoming more integrated with teaching and learning. I think this is where technology might have a role. And the question ultimately is, what do we need from a system, and what is the system, right? So I hear debates that are going on in schools and to some extent universities as well, and it feels very different to the skills world. You know, the whole conversation around assessment and how to do it, and the fears around undermining the quality and final written exams and all those things, it feels a world apart from the world that Julie's describing, where individuals are going into employers and you need to test them in a live setting. It's all very continuous. You want to just test not only their knowledge, obviously their skills and behaviours. You want to capture that and assess it and accredit it so they can demonstrate what they've done and what they're capable of in a way that opens up future opportunities to them. It just feels very, very different. And I think we've got to really articulate our distinctiveness as a sector in that regard.
Definitely.
Now, where are we trying to get to? I mean, very briefly, it seems to me that we have a sort of, at the moment, a sort of periodic learning system. You do sort of periods of your life where you have intensive learning, and then you do practice in different ways, whatever your role or occupation is. And we need to get to something that is more of a continuous learning system, where you're able to work more flexibly. I think, by the way, apprenticeship units are really interesting in this regard, where you're assessed and accredited credibly with quality, but in a setting, and you have the type of flexibility, and training providers and awarding bodies have the type of flexibility that Julie's talking about. And I think actually from sort of individuals, employers, the economy and public service, I think that'll be enormously helpful all around.
Yeah, definitely. Orders sort of basically jumps in. All you do, I was going to ask next, really, wasn't it? If you could have a magic wand, what kind of flexibilities would you want to see in quals? And I was going to probably reframe that a little bit different, Orla. What's working well? What would you want to see to keep? And where are we falling short around developing? Because we both talked about this actually around real competencies and skills, and like what Rebecca's saying, not just sort of just looking purely at the test. Do you know what I mean? Looking at purely at exam. What's working well? Anthony.
I think the traditional sort of qualifications are working well. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, we've got enormously experienced teachers, tutors, awarding organisations, and so on. That's always going to be a core part of the system. I think where we can think about the future is how we can integrate more flexibility into continuous learning, and this is where teaching, learning, and assessment really come together. And I think, I don't want to come across as the tech evangelist here, because I think you have to implement technology carefully and responsibly and ethically. Experts have to be at the center of it, and teachers, tutors, college leaders, are experts in what they do, and you don't want to devolve any of that to technology. But technology can help, because what it can do, it can help you live assess what an individual is doing in a particular setting. And it might be in an immersive learning environment where they're doing some simulated activity, maybe a performance management conversation or a sales pitch or inducting a new colleague or something like that. And you can kind of assess what they're doing. You can watch what they're doing, whether building a wall or assembling a circuit board. And we have people in our portfolio that we grant funded and so on, who are able to sort of observe that whole process and see where it's going right and wrong and give dynamic feedback. And just to finish this point, I was watching a sort of panel session a few months ago about AI in the skills world and education, and everyone, it was all very doom laden, and I can understand that there are huge risks. But I kind of asked, what can go right, and they're all sort of teaching professionals, and their eyes just suddenly lit up, and they said, well, actually, what can go right? Personalization. That's going to help students with SEND who are neurodiverse. It's going to elevate what the professional can do when done in the right way. We're going to be able to expand that support that we give to people without devolving the power to technology itself. And that obviously applies in the assessment setting as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like a lot of technology isn't new as well. I remember Aftab Hussain way before the pandemic talking to me about all sorts of things with chatbots. What's a chatbot? I mean, this is like, ages ago, and around spotting those patterns with learners as well. So not just looking at the assessment side, but why is it on a Tuesday that person isn't arriving or isn't there? It can spot other patterns by being data centric. So I think that's kind of cool. But I'm digressing. Julie, all are asked about flexibilities, and I know that Rebecca's going to want to jump in a second, but what's working? What would you want to see flexibilities wise that sort of come in? How do we truly look at a learner's competency and skills? Because ultimately, an employer, that's what they're really interested in.
Yeah, and I think when I'm listening to that, and I'm listening to that and you made some really valid points there, Anthony. I think we've got a lot to learn from the HE, how they do their assessments as well in the higher education world, because actually they're not prescriptive assessments, are they, that they have to write? They talk about professional conversations and actually being able to talk about being competent, and yet we test our students so much. We've still got assessment methodologies that says research on the internet, 5 of this or 5 of that. It's really prescriptive, and I'm not saying that you don't need. Sorry, my mic's just gone off, so I'll have a bit of a wave there. I'm not saying you've still got to have that general rule, and so that we have got that stability across where we are knowing our learners, but we have got to give them that more flexibility in that way, I think, where we can do it through professional conversations, and how we talk about adapting our learning and meeting individual needs. Well, isn't that one way we can do it, giving us more scope to how we assess?
Can I also bring in Joshua, the longest question? If we could try to keep them short, guys, this would be good. Poor old Lindsay, his face is gone. But I think it's an interesting point here around looking just in time and looking at flexibilities as well, which I think is an interesting point there from Joshua, and not going to the September and academic timetable basically, but what does that mean for practicalities of running things from a college perspective and for staffing? I think is a really interesting point to then raise into there. But Rebecca, we've had the audience asking a million questions. I think I need to get you in, and I know you've got so much to ask with
well, I could talk about flexibilities all day, because I think it's something that I'm worried about us losing flexibility with the advent of V levels. We know they're going to be quite external exam heavy, and I understand why. But we know that flexibility works really well for learners with additional needs as well. If we can be flexible in the type of response that we want learners to provide. I'm going to use the AI phrase again, because obviously it's so important in the assessment conversation at the moment. So AI is just changing the way that we assess and the way that learners engage with assessment. So we need to be flexible as well in terms of the assessment methodologies that we're developing for the future, to make sure that they can be sort of cheated by AI, but also that we're making the most of how learners engage with AI, and we're potentially even changing what we're looking for in assessments. You know, in the modern workforce, we're all using AI every day, or certainly, you know, I am, to as a bit of a collaborator, personal assistant, that kind of thing. So we need to consider whether what we're assessing needs to change, as well as those assessment models, you know, as we move into this technology moving at 100 miles an hour. But that's my take on it, Gavin. And I've got some questions to ask as well.
Yeah, like this is like backed up what you're saying, and added a layer to it actually. So like around how do we also ensure that learners have that feeling of safety, about that constant sort of surveillance sort of stuff. Not sort of 1984 situation going on and stuff, but yeah, really good point, Lizzie. But Rebecca, everyone's getting really involved, aren't they?
I know. Well, you know, it's really interesting. So I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few weeks. Obviously, talking about the AI impact on assessment and how we'll change assessment models. And for me, it brings in a new era of in-person assessment as well. So not to turn our back on technology, but when Julie talked about that world skills competition methodology earlier, I just think that's such an interesting approach to assessing practical skills and putting learners under the sort of I'm going to use the word pressure, but it's not pressure that's uncomfortable. It's the sort of pressure they'd feel in the workplace to complete a task, and putting them in those kinds of situations. So I wondered if I could ask Julie and Anthony about any other sort of ideas around the assessment for the future that you think would have a really positive impact as we look to rewrite the rules and move into this this future qualifications landscape. So perhaps Julie, if we start with you.
Oh, that's a really, if we had, is this that what the question you gave us, the last one, the way we could rewrite the rules?
Yeah.
Completely rewrite the rules. Well, I do think we need to be ambitious in where we're thinking. And again, we need to go back to the HE model, where we can do more professional conversations, more competency based. And what you were saying, I saw a comment come up about the driving license. I really believe that. I think when you go into your driving license, you take that theory test. I think it's a really good analogy. You take the theory test very quickly, and then you learn to apply those skills. Then you take that test, or you learn those skills over time, and then you get your license at the end of it, the competency, the license to practice. And I think that is something we should be looking at, how we deliver that. I know we've got the assessment in EPA a little bit in that way, in apprenticeship, but we don't have anything like that within our FE world. So that would be really great if we could use something like that, in my thoughts anyway. That would be a really great analogy. I suppose just picking something up about your AI though, it is about ensuring that we've got to give those students those critical thinking skills as well, because I know I use AI an awful lot when I'm writing letters, everything now. I pop it into AI, I bullet point things, I get a wonderful letter. I can test that authenticity and if it's valid, because I've got the skill of letter writing. So what we don't want to do within it as well is de-skill our learners.
Yeah, definitely. Critical thinking is absolutely key.
Absolutely.
It's a part of AI literacy, I would say, if you know what I mean. It's got to be like Joshua's jumps in again around AI usage. Go back to your point up, really, Julie, around how we're supporting learners. And it's that hand in hand, really, isn't it? And also Haley's come in around, we're talking a lot about younger learners, it's felt, but like also looking at adult learners as well. We're going through early stages of the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to probably have to work till we're 75 or something. We've got to reskill, upskill, and it's going to go. It feels like the rocket ship is on the launch pad still. We've had the countdown, it's still shaking, it hasn't gone yet, if you know what I mean. I think it's a really interesting point. But yeah, sorry, just bringing in the guests. Sorry about that.
Well, I actually think that final comment was a really interesting one in terms of how Anthony might want to respond to that question around the future. because we have got these different audiences, which are actually, they're more separate than ever in many ways, aren't they? With adult skills going to DWP, for example.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, and it's so strange. We kind of import, I think, a lot of the perspectives and fears and anxieties from other parts of the education sector into the adult skills world. And I think the point Julie made about critical thinking is absolutely central to this. And I wanted to pick up an earlier comment I think it was Lizzie made around the student fears and attitudes in this process, because I think it's so important. It's so easy to forget. And actually, you know, I think good adoption is adoption that people trust, and you have to build that trust. People aren't going to trust it just because a tech vendor comes along and says this is the thing you need to adopt and there's a magic solution to all your problems. And by the way, you know, your students will love it. Well, no, your students might not. And actually, I think a lot of young people especially are very skeptical about AI because they've grown up in a social media universe and they share that. You know, I think those of us who are further on in our lives and careers, we've kind of come to this skepticism, but they've lived and breathed it all their life. So there is that sort of that questioning and skepticism, and I think that's really healthy, and I think it needs to be embraced, but not embraced to the point where we sort of abdicate our responsibility to try and implement technologies that can genuinely help in a well-designed fashion, which includes student voice in how you develop and design it. And I think the question around adults is so important. It comes back to this continuous learning system question, and I think it's a national failure that we're not further along this road. Just to put that bluntly, you know, we have there's been talk about this now for decades. And we keep on pulling away from adult continuous development in a variety of different ways, not just in public funding, but employers as well. And I would say even as individuals, I don't think we are doing what we need to adapt to a very complex environment where the workforce is going to change. We're not going to see the end of work or mass unemployment or any of those things, I can promise you that, but we are going to see work change. And we need to think about that, and people need to be helped through that process and need to be present in that process. So we need to think, okay, how does that work from an assessment point of view? How does that work from a quality assurance point of view? How does it work from a funding point of view? How do we build a story about the importance of it? How do we enlist employers in that process? And that, for me, is really where we need that sort of national movement around adult skills. And that's what feels to be lacking somewhat at the moment. We're all advocates for it, of course we are, because of what we do on day to day and what we're passionate about. But as a big public conversation, I just don't see the same thing here that I see in somewhere like Singapore.
100%. And yeah, Singapore, I've had the privilege of going at these, but spoke to the guy who's orchestrated the SSG stuff. Very, very interesting around how you sort of can kick that off around keeping continuous learning going. We're getting short on time. I've got questions coming in. Rebecca, I know you've got another one around. You've probably got about 5 different questions. I
think with one, Gavin, because I think it does kind of link in with what Anthony and Julie were just saying. So obviously, assessment innovation is a topic we think about a lot at NCFE, and Anthony, we've done some fab work with UFI Box Tech Trust on this over the last few years in our assessment innovation fund. So if we think about assessment innovation wholesale, so including things like those analog innovations as well, like the really interesting, as I mentioned, the kind of competition methodology for world skills. How do you think that these types of assessment opportunities are really effective in supporting inclusion, progression, and confidence for young people, rather than creating the sort of barriers that we might see with external exams? You know, and I mentioned some of the challenges around that. So I don't know whether you've got any reflections on that, on those sort of core competencies that we're looking to develop in our young people. And maybe we'll start with Anthony this time, if that's okay.
Well, just very briefly, there's two elements of this that I see. One is that integrated point you mentioned, so the formative assessment opportunity to do developmental work as part of your learning and curriculum. So I did an immersive conversation with an AI avatar for 15 minutes, a performance management conversation. I was the manager and the AI was the very difficult employee. And it was cutting edge technology. It's not available on the market as yet, I don't think. But it gave me a readout at the end of it that I thought, as an experienced manager, I thought the detailed points it was made of what I should have done better and what I did well actually were very, very good. So that's, and you think about that in a whole series of different ways, but also practical skills as well with computer vision and so on and so forth. Absolutely important. So I think that there is a huge opportunity there. We need to think about how the technologies can support the tutors in that endeavour.
Fabulous, thanks, Anthony. I'm really intrigued by that that chatbot. I'd love to have a workplace conversation with it.
Scary.
I bet it is. And over to you, Julie. So I know we've had some really fantastic conversations about the impact that World Skills, for example, has had on your learners, and the local skills competitions that you've had in the region.
Yeah. So it's embedded in all our strategy basically, because I think saying something again, what you said earlier, Rebecca, it's not pressure testing, and it is uncomfortable, but life is uncomfortable for our learners, so they do need to be pushed, because even going into an interview is going to be a pressure. So I'm really, and what I feel about the World Skills and the way we do the assessments and ensure that that is part of all our students' entitlement is that they get the opportunity to show those human skills as well. So it's not all, and that's what we need to be assessing to me. When we're assessing, it's how they work in a team. It's what employers want. It's all those wraparound things. So although the AI is fantastic, we still need to see, AI is going to be fantastic. And I use it all the time, as I've said. Our staff use it for writing the assessments. Our students, I suppose that's a controversial one. Our students use it for writing some of their assessments and putting it into it. But then the validity comes through as observation, doesn't it, in those professional conversations. So actually using World Skills and seeing how they use those competencies is the way we use our assessment. And that's the best way. All our students, it's not that we throw them straight into it, but they really like that way of working and really see that it actually does give them the edge when they go out. And it's not always going to the World Skills competition at the end of it and getting an Olympic medal or whatever. It is about them being the best they can be.
Yeah, and what better way to see if learners can do something in the AI age than actually see them do the thing in person, physically?
Absolutely.
100%. We're literally out of time. Order, you put some really good points over, which I'll just slam in now, but around standardization and flexibilities is a really good point, but it's run out of time, I'm afraid, Orla, and around continuous learning being critical to adult skills. Absolutely, totally. But wrapping it up, and we have like 1 minute left. If you was to redesign assessment totally from scratch, what would you build in as a one-liner, Anthony?
I would build in high quality verified micro credentials related to real employer needs and skills, to enable the individual to evidence what they can do in some practical detail.
Yeah, it goes back to Singapore. Like loving the micro credentials in Singapore. Julie, what would you build in?
Exactly the same. Make sure that the employers are more involved with the assessments and ensure that we are future-proofed in our students to get the jobs that they need, basically.
Yeah, no, really cool. Rebecca, what would you want? Because you live this every day.
Yeah, I'm going for transparency. So understanding what everyone needs in the system, building on Julie and Anthony's employer point, but learners, teachers, everyone else who's a key stakeholder in that system, making sure we understand what they need and that it's built in and people can see that is built in and it's part of the assessment methodology.
Yeah, no, really cool. And if I was to say, I'd want it to have inclusion in mind. We were there, SENS, Neuro Inclusion Collective the other day. Yeah, really important that we do this by design as well, to be inclusive, because I think that's key. Well, we've had so many more questions coming in as well, but thank you everyone for really going for it today. Really interesting chat. We could be doing this like literally about 2 days, but thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Julie. Rebecca, as always, thank you. We've got the show for next week is going to be around rewriting the rules. It's going to be around apprenticeships to skills eng. So it leads on really, really well. It's 10 o'clock on the 20th of May, so next Wednesday. So join us for that. Just wanted to say thank you everyone for all of your comments, and we'll see you next week. And thank you for joining us. And sorry if we couldn't get to all of your points, but really, really engaging conversations. Thank you, everyone, and we see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.